Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning is Nedarim daf Lamed Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadron Zoom group in honor of Shiur Farber's Army service and with gratitude to your parents for raising you with such strong values. As Shiur Farber drafts into Tzahal, defending the Jewish people and ensuring our security, we are reminded of what we learned with her mother in Masechet Brachot. Rav Zutra Bar Tuvia said that Rav said, "What is the meaning of that which is written? He has made everything beautiful in its time." This teaches that each and every individual, God has made their work pleasant for them in their own eyes. Shira, we wish you years of meaningful and impactful service and that your specific job, your umanut, will bring you great satisfaction. Thank you, everybody. And today's daf is also dedicated to Mimi and Rafi Shachat on the birth of a baby boy last night. Mazal tov to Mimi, who works for us at Hadran. We're looking forward to meeting the baby and very excited for you. Okay, we will get started now with all those exciting announcements. We will get started on our daf, a very fascinating daf. Okay, we're going to learn, as we started it yesterday, we're going to learn all about getting paid for teaching. Is one allowed to? Is one not allowed to? I'll already tell you that. Very worthwhile listen to hear it with Gefet, which is really, I think, the daf has very interesting things, but it's even more interesting to see what was done with our daf in later generations. And Rabbanit El Shimoni gave a shiur this week for Gefet, which will be up on our site within the next few hours, about this issue of getting paid for teaching. Can teachers get paid salaries, right? If not, we'd be in big trouble, right? It's already bad enough that teachers don't make enough money, right? But now to say can't get any salary, how would you ever have anybody going into education? So anyway, it seems clear from our Gemara, as we're going to learn also even more about it, that it's really an issue to get a salary for teaching Torah. So let's go back to our Mishnah for a minute. And I also want to point out something that someone on Facebook actually noted is, and once I got to today's stuff, I noticed it very more blatantly, but it was something I missed entirely. Sometimes when you're teaching the daf, you go so quickly that you miss something really important, which is our Mishnah said. Let's read the words of our Mishnah, and then I'll point out what's so fascinating. Midrash, Halachot Agadot. So in the middle of our Mishnah, it says, if someone is forbidden to benefit from you, they can still teach you Midrash, Halakha, and Aggada, but lo yilamdenu mikra, they can't teach you Torah. Okay, that was the first line, and today's stuff is going to basically be trying to figure out why we have this distinction between Midrash and Torah. We'll call it Midrash, really it's Midrash, Halakha, and Aggadot. Call it simply Midrash, but you can take money for teaching Torah. Okay, right? That's what we said at the end of yesterday's talk, which is you can teach Midrash because Shmuel had said it's a place where people don't take salary for Midrash. But because people take salary for teaching Torah, basically you're not allowed to benefit from them. This would be a case like with the returning the lost item where they didn't charge you for it. Okay, because they didn't charge you, you're benefiting from them because they could have charged you. Okay, so we'll get back to Shmuel in a minute. Here comes the big line that I somehow just really missed, which is, but you can teach his sons and his daughters Torah. In other words, if I can't benefit from you, so you can teach me Torah. I'm sorry, you can't teach me Torah. You can teach me Midrash, but you can teach my sons and my daughters Torah. Now, what do you mean daughters? Daughters? You can teach the daughters Torah, right? Aren't there all these sources that girls aren't allowed to learn Torah? Okay, so here you have an explicit Mishnah that says sons and daughters are part of Limud Torah, right? Very interesting. Well, it's even more interesting if you notice that there's a little note by it, okay? The first thing I did was I looked in Safrai, because Safrai I wanted to see, Mishnah Eretz Yisrael, what does he have to say about this Mishnah? And he always talks about the historical piece. And he didn't address this at all. And then I looked and I saw, well, he always bases the Mishnah not on our text, but on the manuscripts. And the manuscripts don't have the words ve'epinotav, which is even more interesting. Which means that the early manuscripts didn't have the daughters, and that means, and in fact, the note here, okay, if you see there's a little, in my book, it's an aleph, and it goes down to the Hagahot Tziyunim. All depends kind of how your number system works on your Gemara that you're looking at, if you have a Gemara that has the regular way of looking. And it says, Aval b'chol kitvei hayad lo garsina ve'epinotav. Doesn't have this in the kitvei hayad and the manuscripts, and the Rambam and the Torah didn't mention this at all. Okay, and we're going to see later today different girsaot about the Gemara on this as well. And basically, it seems like somebody added this later on, I assume, if it wasn't in the early manuscripts, or else maybe it was in some early manuscript, but it's very interesting to think if it wasn't in the early manuscript. So who added this in and what motivated them to add it in? Was it, we're not talking about someone, past, I don't know, like in the 1800s when feminism had already started, but way before this, because we're going to see the Ran talks about the fact that there's two different versions. And already in his time, 1300s, already there were obviously two versions. Where this came from is really fascinating, and it's a good question. I don't have an answer for it, but it's very interesting to note that girls seem to be included here in learning, in studying, which is really interesting. Okay, so I see someone's asking, why is it not considered benefit if someone teaches your children Torah? So that's a good question, because the way they define benefit, as far as I understand, is to benefit directly. So if your children are learning, that's not directly benefiting you. Whether, you can argue against that, but that's what the Mishna is saying. So let's go back to our Gemara, and we'll get back to that issue about the girls later on. So Malamdo Midrash Halachot Agadot, not Mikra, to which the Gemara says, Mikra, my time at Lo Yilamdenu. I'm going back to the bottom of Lamed Vav Amud review from yesterday. Why? Because the Kamahanile. Obviously, you're benefiting from them. So Midrash, Nami Kamahanile. If you're talking about learning is benefit, well, then you're also benefiting from learning Midrash. So Shmuel says, so basically Shmuel does what we call an ukimta. The Mishnah is talking about a particular place where notlim sachar lemikra ve'ein notlim sachar lemidrash, where people get paid for teaching Torah, they don't get paid for teaching Midrash. To which the Gemara said, and that was where we left off, my psaka. Why is there this distinction? In other words, more really what the question is if the Mishnah is talking about a particular place where they take money for one and they don't take money for the other, the Mishnah should have said, in a place where they take a salary, you can't get taught by them for free because you're benefiting. If it's a place where they don't take a salary, or if it's content that they don't take a salary on, in other words, if the salary is the issue, it should have said that, and not midrash and mikra, which are like what code words for you get paid, you don't get paid. To which the Gemara says, well, yeah, it is really a code word, and the reason why they used it was because it's not just randomly you happen to get salary if you're a Torah teacher and you don't get salary for a Midrash teacher, but it's hakam mashma, and it comes to teach you the afilu b'makom shenotlim sachar lemikra. Afilu b'makom shenotlim sachar. It's to teach you that even in a place where teachers get paid for teaching, it's not arbitrary. The Mishnah happens to be telling a place where Torah teachers get salaries, but Midrash teachers don't. It's that if you are in a place where they do let you get a salary for teaching, they're only going to let you get a salary for teaching Torah, and they're not going to let you get a salary for teaching Midrash. And Midrash, again, includes Midrash, Halakha, Aggada, Mishna, Gemara, whatever we would call those. You can't get a salary for that. And that didn't really satisfy it's not a satisfactory explanation because, okay, fine, you're stating that, but again, why? To which the Gemara says, Mishna Midrash Delo, I don't understand. Why do you think you can't get paid for Midrash? Well, we're going to learn it from Moshe Rabbeinu and Psukim from Sefer Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 4. It says in chapter 4, verse 14, Oti tziva Hashem ba'et hahi. This is in Moshe's speech to the Jewish people, when they're on Avot Moav, they're standing on the other side of the Jordan. He says to them, Oti tziva Hashem ba'et hahi l'lamed etchem. God commanded me at that moment to teach you. Uchtiv. And then it says, this is earlier in same chapter, but verse 5, Re'ei limadeti etchem chukim mishpatim kasher tzivani Hashem. See, now this is going to be the key word, see that I taught you chukim, mishpatim, all the laws and statutes that as God taught me. Now, why re'eh? In other words, he already said, or again, he said it later, but it doesn't really matter the order, right? I'm teaching you at this moment, and then it says, and I want you to see that I'm teaching you. So comes the Gemara and says, Ma ani bechinam, afatem bechinam. Well, how did I teach you Torah? I didn't charge you any money. So just like I did, re'eh means see and take example. And this is how you should do it. So just like I didn't charge you for teaching Torah, you shouldn't charge as well. So based on this, what was Moshe teaching them? Right? He might have been teaching them Midrash and Halachot and Aggadot, but he was obviously also teaching them Torah. That's really much of what there was at that time. To which they say, Mikra nami bechinam. Well, then it should be no difference, Mikra or Mishnah, okay, or Midrash, however you call it. So we're now going to have two explanations. So again, we're still within Shmuel. I want to be clear on the structure here. And there's a study guide that will help you organize all this, which is what we've done now is we had a question, we had Shmuel's answer. We had difficulties on Shmuel's answer that we keep answering. And every time we answer, it raises another question. So we're still within Shmuel, but the Mishnah is talking about a place where they charge money for Torah. That's why you can't learn Torah from them. But they don't charge money for Midrash. And that's why you can, because it's not considered benefit, because they wouldn't charge you anyway. But we're still stuck with why that distinction. For that, we're going to have two answers. And basically today's daf is dealing with these two answers. Rav Amar Schar Shimur. Rav says, you're getting paid for babysitting, basically, okay? What you're getting paid for is the fact that you're watching over these children. And that's what you're getting paid for. Okay. In a minute, we're going to say, who said we were talking about children, right? When we were talking about Mudar and no one said it was children only. But according to him, it's children, because obviously grown-ups, I would assume, don't need babysitting, right? When I teach you a class, it's not like I'm worried you're going to go, wreak havoc in the world and I have to make sure you're in the classroom. I don't have to babysit anybody. But when it's children, you have to babysit them. Wait till you'll see some interesting gender statement later about this. So again, it's, as I said, it's a bit of a gender daf with this banot thing, but we'll get back to that. Rabbi Yochanan amal schar pisuk ta'amim. Well, what you're getting paid for when you teach Torah is not the content of the Torah. That would be more like Midrash and Halakha and Aggadot, but you can't take salary for that because that was given. Right, that was given in the Torah. We're commanded to learn it in the Torah, like Moshe taught it. That has to be free. But the Torah has an additional element, which is pisuk ta'amim. There's the ta'amei amikra, as we call them, right? The notes and the punctuation that tell us when to stop and what tune to sing it in. That you're allowed to take money for. Okay, so bar mitzvah teachers or bat mitzvah teachers, right? That there you have it, right? That you could take money for, because that's, what do you call it, a skill, and it's not part of the Torah, the content of the Torah. And that obviously doesn't exist by Midrash, Halakha, and Aggadot. There is no such thing. So that's two different answers, okay? So now, obviously, if you're talking about schar shimur, that would explain why a teacher could get paid for teaching children in an elementary school. Now, if you're a teacher, you might not want to be called a babysitter, right? It kind of is a little bit of a mockery because you're obviously doing much more than babysitting. Not that babysitting isn't an important and a good job. It is, but it's not a teacher, right? A teacher comes with an expertise of knowledge in a particular area and doesn't view themselves as a babysitter. But according to this, at least you'll be able to get salary because you're viewed as watching the children. If you say pisuk ta'amim, then it's only certain things you could teach that you could actually get paid salary for. Again, obviously, and this is not for our daf shiur, but Rabbanit El Shimoni, and it'll be up soon on our website. You should definitely listen to her shiur about how this went through different commentaries over time, viewed this and how they dealt with the issue that if you don't pay teachers, who's gonna teach our children and even our adults, and how can you have adult education that you get paid for, and how this issue was resolved over time. And what the attitudes are to salaries of teachers, etc. One of the issues that comes in, I'll just mention, but really you should definitely listen, is the issue of schar batala, which we discussed recently. I just wanted to mention it because we talked about it. When someone returns a lost item, they could get paid the amount that they would have been working otherwise, right? You basically prevented them from going to work, so you get paid money of schar batala. Theoretically, one could look at it like that, maybe. Anyway, there's a lot of interesting things there. We're going to leave it for Gethet. Okay. Now, we now have these two opinions. What we're going to do is we're going to bring two difficulties on Rav, one from our Mishnah, one from a braita, and we're going to try to resolve them. Tnan. So remember, Rav says it's babysitting. Schar shimur. Tnan. Lo yilamdenu mikra. It says in the Mishnah, you can't teach someone who's forbidden to benefit from you. You can't teach them Torah. If you say it's the ta'amim, hainu de lo yilamdenu. That's why you can't teach anyone mikra, because we're talking about pisuk ta'amim. We're talking about specifically the punctuation, and that's something generally people get paid for, and that's something that you can't get then if they do it. They let you do it for free. That would be you're getting benefit from someone you're not allowed to benefit from. Ela lamad amar schar shimur gadol bal shimur hu. This is exactly what I said. The Mishnah, we assumed you were talking about an older person. But he said we were talking about children. And in fact, in a minute, we'll prove why it's definitely not children. So an older person who's learning should be able to learn Torah from you because you're not benefiting them because you can't take money for that, according to Rav. There's no babysitting involved, and then therefore they can't charge money. So you should be able to if you're not a minor. So bikatan katani, they say, we're talking about minors. To which the Gemara says, how could you possibly say the Mishnah is talking about a minor? What line is going to be problematic in the Mishnah? Ibikatani maseifa aval melamed banav mikra. It says, notice by the way, it doesn't say benotav here, right? They're quoting from the Mishnah and it says just the sons. You could say they just cut it off, but it's going to be less convincing in another minute. So it says in the Seifa, you can teach, right? It says you can't teach them Torah, but you can teach their sons and daughters Torah. Okay, now no minors are going to be having children. So if the subject is young children, then the second line makes absolutely no sense. Katan bar banimu, a minor can have children? We just saw that, right? Minors, obviously, we know minors don't have children. Okay, so now we're going to say the following. It's missing words, and this is how it should read. Okay, they're now rereading the Mishnah. In order to explain the Mishnah according to Rav, you're going to have to reread the Mishnah. Lo yalamdenu mikra b'katan. The first part where it says don't teach a child mikra is talking about a child because that's something you could get paid for because it's babysitting. Im haya gadol, if the person's older, milamdo lo ulabanav mikra. But if he's older, okay, there's two sentences. One is you can teach him Mishna, you can't Midrash, you can't teach him Torah. The second line is, but even though you can't teach him Torah, you can teach his children Torah. So now they say what it means is really you can't teach Torah is a minor. The second line means, well, if you're not a minor, and therefore you can't get paid you can't pay the teacher even for teaching you mikra, then you can learn and your children can learn as well. Notice here it says, if they're rereading the Mishnah, this is why it's hard to say. It seems like this text of the Gemara that we're reading did not have epinotav in the Mishnah, because if they're rereading it, they usually say all the words. So it would have said, Melamdo lo ulabanav ulibnotav mikra. Okay, and to the daughters mikra. So the text that this is based on seems not to have had that in the Mishnah. However, we're going to see that the text later on, I would bet, seems to, yes, include girls in the Mishnah. So our text must be made up of possibly different manuscripts, right? This is what happens. There were different manuscripts, and the person who decided to print this edition, right, took manuscripts and kind of took edits from here and there, and wasn't necessarily the biggest Talmid Chacham who put it together, and we ended up with this. Okay, Meitive. So now we have question number 2. So question number 1 was on our Mishnah. Question number 1 on Rav. Our Mishnah seemed to be talking about not a minor. Well, it's talking about a minor. We add some words in. We split the 2 sentences a little bit and change things around. And if you're really not a minor, then you can actually learn Torah from anyone because they can't take money anyway. Meitive. Second question. Meitive is a word that introduces a braita or a Mishnah that contradicts something an Amora is saying. So again, we're going against Rav and in the babysitting answer. Tinokot lo korin b'tchila b'Shabbat, ela shonim barishon. Children can't learn something for the first time on Shabbos, but they can review for the first time. They can do their first chazara, okay? Their first review of something they've already learned. They can review on Shabbat, but they just can't learn something for the first time. So now we're going to have to figure out why this is. We're going to give one explanation at first, which is going to raise a question on Rav. And then in the end, we're going to say that actually is even a question on Rabbi Yochanan. And then they're going to say, we're going to give 2 totally different explanations of this braita, in which case it has nothing to do with our issue. But the beginning, they think it does. If you say that people take money for pisuk tamim, for teaching tamei mikra, that explains why you can't do it for the first time on Shabbat. Why? Because the assumption is you do pisuk tamim because it's hard, right? You can take money because it's hard work. Now, when's the real hard work done? First time you teach it. The first time you teach how to read, the first time you look at a text and you teach those ta'amim, it's very challenging. The second time when the child's reviewing it, it's not such hard work. So for that, you don't really take salary. So therefore, you can review with your teacher on Shabbat because they're not going to take salary on them. You can't start learning something because that's a lot of hard work and the teacher's going to charge you for it. And you can't charge money on Shabbat. So therefore, you can't do it on Shabbat. But Ela, Lamanda, Amar, Schar, Shimul, you might argue with this, but don't worry, they're going to reject this whole explanation. It's not the most convincing reading. Ela, Lamanda, Amar, Schar, Shimur, but if you say it's babysitting, Amai in Kolim B'tchila B'Shabbat, V'amai Shonim B'Rishon. If it's all babysitting, it makes no difference whether the content is challenging and difficult or easy, right? That's the main difference. Is it easy content or challenging content? What's the difference? If you're babysitting someone, you're babysitting them, right? If it doesn't matter how challenging the material is, you're basically making sure they're not, again, it's a good question, what exactly you're babysitting them from. Are you protecting them from animals walking on the street that they don't attack them? Are you protecting them from being wild and crazy and wreaking havoc on the city, or not clear. And when we get to our gender line in the Gemara coming up, it's even more unclear what exactly the danger is, but we'll get back to that soon. So in any case, it shouldn't make a difference. Your salary shouldn't be different, whether you're teaching them difficult material or easy material. In the end, you're getting paid for keeping them off the streets, which you're doing. So maybe that's where the line comes of, I'm doing this, it's keeping me off the streets, right? In other words, it's this idea that I could be doing dangerous things or something, so it keeps me in line. Anyway, to which the Gemara says, I don't even understand why you think let's go back to Rabbi Yochanan, okay? You asked this as a question on Rav, but Rabbi Yochanan said it's Schar Pisuk Tamim. Our assumption was, why Schar Pisuk Tamim? Because it's much more challenging, and therefore you're going to get paid for that and not for the other. And therefore you can't get paid on Shabbat because you're going to get paid a salary, and that's a problem. Who says it's forbidden to teach someone on Shabbos and take money for it? Why is it not a problem? Havla'ahi. This is what we call havla. What is havla? Livloa is to swallow up. So havla'a, which comes from that root, means that your salary, we're assuming that you're a teacher who teaches the kid all week long. And then you're teaching the child also on Shabbat. Now, you should be able to get a salary for the week or for the month or for the year. And then you can work on Shabbat as long as you don't get paid specifically just for the hours on Shabbat. What we do is we pay you a little more for the hours you did during the week. And that covers your Shabbat hours. That's how it works. That's how people can do jobs on Shabbat. Like if you're in catering or a rabbi, exactly, or a chazan, right? That's how they get paid. They get paid for the work they do during the week. Even though we add more money, in the end, they do get paid for their work on Shabbat. But we kind of add more money to the work they did during the week and call it like that, and it gets absorbed in, and it's okay. How do we know this is okay? But Havla'a Mishra Shari, Havla'a is permitted. And therefore, again, the question is, if you use this as your explanation, it doesn't work for Rabbi Yochanan either, because it shouldn't matter. The rabbi should be able to get paid for hard work he does on Shabbat, because it makes no difference. It's Havla'a. Teacher teaches the child during the week, should get paid anyway. Ditanya, as we see in a braita, hasocher et hapoel lishmor et hatinok. Right, this is also babysit. You could babysit on Shabbat and get paid as long as you babysit for them during the week. If you only babysit for them on Shabbat, it's a problem. Okay, it's actually a question like when you do groups. Right, exactly. Miriam, you're writing this to say group leaders. Group leaders on Shabbat are a bit of a problem. What you really need to do to resolve the halachic problem, have them come before Shabbat or after Shabbat to set up or clean up, do something not on Shabbat. Pay them high wages for the work they did not on Shabbat, and then that covers what they did on Shabbat. So if you hire a worker, what's a poel? A poel is not just a worker, the way we would define worker. It's a day worker. Worker works for the day per hour. If you hire a day worker, lishmor tatinok, to watch your child, lishmor tapara, to watch your animal, your cow, lishmor tazra'im, to watch your field, ein notnim lo schar Shabbat. You can't pay for their work on Shabbat. Lefichach, therefore, Im avdu, if they got lost, we're now moving to Amud Bet. If the item you're supposed to be watching, and theoretically you were supposed to be watching on Shabbat, but you're not getting paid for your work on Shabbat, well then, eno chayav achor yutan. If you're not getting paid, well then you're not responsible if something happens to them. But im hayas schir Shabbat, now there's a few words here that are going to be translated differently than the way you usually use them. Schir Shabbat, Shabbat means a week. We've seen this many times. I'll give you the best example. In Echad mi Yodea, right, we sing at the Seder, Shiva Yemei Shabbata, 7 days of the week, or Hayom Yom Rishon b'Shabbat that we say in the Shiur Shel Yomi. We've seen this in the Gemara many times. Shabbat means a week. If you're paid for the week, schir chodesh, you get paid by the month. Schir shana, you get paid by the year. And here's the other tricky word, schir shavua. Shavua, we normally think means a week, which doesn't make sense. We already said a week. And why would it be at the end? We're kind of going up. Shavua means a 7-year cycle. If you get paid for 7 years, okay, you have a 7-year contract. Interesting that, right? In those days, it was probably made sense because the Shemitah cycle, you get paid for 7 years, like the 7-year Shemitah cycle. So if you're in agriculture, you might have that. So anyway, if you were one of those workers, no tein lo schar Shabbat, then you could get paid for Shabbat. And therefore, because of Havla, because it gets absorbed in the regular salary, and therefore, for your work on Shabbat, if it gets lost on Shabbat or somebody steals the fruits in the field and you weren't watching properly, well, then you're responsible because you actually got paid. If that was all to tell us, Havla is permitted. So now we're back to Rabbi Yochanan. This braita doesn't make sense according to Rav, and it doesn't make sense according to Rabbi Yochanan. So now we're stuck with the braita. And here's a fascinating line. They're now going to explain the braita in 2 different ways. They're going to say the braita doesn't mean what you thought it meant, which is you could get paid for one and not paid for the other because one, right? It is that one is hard work and one is not hard work, but it has nothing to do with these issues that we're talking about. Why you're getting paid? You're getting paid for Pesuk Tamim, you're getting paid for this. It has to do with not a salary-related issue at all. It has to do with a different issue. If the teacher teaches the child on Shabbat something difficult, what will happen? It will take them a long time to teach. And then what will happen? Well, mishum yifnu avuton diyinuke lemitzvata deshabta. We want the fathers to be free to have time with the children to do the mitzvah of Shabbat. What exactly does this mean? Good question. So there's a few interpretations. It's probably more than what I'm giving you, and it's actually a very interesting line to look into and figure out what other interpretations exist. But I'll give you 2. One is you want the children, if the children are in school all day on Shabbat or they're learning something complicated and they go to the Shiur and the teacher starts teaching them something complicated and they end up staying there for a very long time, what will happen? They won't come home. The family will be waiting the whole time for the child to come home, waiting to eat, and they're pushing off their own Shabbat. Either they won't even do it because till the kid comes home, it'll already be Shabbat will be over, or maybe it'll just push them off and they'll be starving, and you don't want to be starving on Shabbat. So it will affect the Oneg Shabbat of the family if the children aren't there. That's one explanation. But another, again, the words literally mean yifnu, like yet panoi, they'll be free, the fathers of the children, to do the mitzvah of Shabbat. So the Ran understands this a little bit differently. I'm going to read in the Ran. The Ran says, right, yifnu avoton diyinuke, she'avot hatinokot ponim lemitzvat Shabbat, that the fathers of the children will be free to do mitzvah Shabbat. What's the mitzvah Shabbat? So we thought maybe eating, right? But he says no. And this is fascinating. I don't know where he gets this from. And maybe this will affect your upcoming Shabbat. And they play with the children. It sounds like it's a mitzvah to play games with your children on Shabbat, like to hang out with them. And if, now, usually what happens in most houses, right? The parents just want to sleep on Shabbat and the kids want to play games, right? Not necessarily this happens everywhere. But what do we see here? We're worried if the children work too hard in school, they'll come home very tired and they won't want to hang out with their parents. Very interesting, although you do have kids who would rather go play with their friends than their parents also. But this is more because the kids are tired and want to take a nap, which rarely happens, at least in my house. So at least when they're younger. Right. Now at this point, my kids all sleep, but yeah, that's a whole different story. But I assume we're talking about younger children here that get too tired from having learned. And then, they want to. So anyway, fascinating where the Ran gets it. There's a mitzvah. Lishtasheh is to play and hang out. It's very interesting that and it makes sense, right? That's really what we're supposed to do on Shabbat. Spend time with our families. And school, heavy shiur will get in the way of that. Okay, so that's option number 1 to understanding the braita, in which case this has absolutely nothing to do with salary or not salary of getting paid, has nothing to do with getting paid. Second option, mishum de b'shabta achlin v'shatin v'yakir alehen alma. On Shabbat, we eat and drink a lot, and then the world becomes heavy on us. What does that mean? It means we get tired, right? You eat a big meal, you get tired. They even say here, Kedamar Shmuel shinoi veset chilat chole me'ayim. We saw this at the end of Ketubah. That when you eat a lot on Shabbat and you're not used to eating a lot, it causes stomach problems. Okay, I don't think they only mean stomach problems, but the point is that when you change something, right? And all of a sudden you're eating a lot more than usual, you get very tired. That's why a lot of people end up napping on Shabbat. One of the reasons. It's not the only reason, right? But they end up, you're just tired and heavy from the meal. And therefore what? Well, therefore they won't be able to concentrate properly on learning. So don't teach them something complicated because they're not going to understand it. They don't have the energy for heavy, serious learning. That's a totally different explanation. I mean, in any case, both these explanations resolve our issue with the braita because the braita had nothing to do with salaries, which is where we were coming from in the beginning. So we had two questions on Rav, and we resolved them both. Ulamanda amar schar pisuk ta'amim, my time alone amar schar shimur. Now we're going to say, why didn't each one hold like the other? So why did Rabbi Yochanan, who held schar pisuk ta'amim, why didn't he hold schar shimur? Why didn't he say it was babysitting? Hasavar, here comes the gender line, fascinating line. Banot mi kabayin shimur. He says if the whole issue is shimur, and that's why you're not allowed to teach Tanakh, the assumption is that the Mishnah was referring to men and women. All the Mishnayot were referring to men and women, right? And Nedarim goes men, women, all that. And we mentioned the banot at the end there that you can teach their sons and daughters Torah, which means that you can't teach the boys and girls Torah, though, only if they're sons and daughters of the person who was Mudar and Ab, not if they were the ones. And now here's the fascinating thing. Well, if it's shimur and you're just doing babysitting, girls don't need babysitting. Okay, young girls don't need to be babysat. Okay, for whoever thinks that, girls, now, why don't girls need babysitting? Unclear. So the Ran says it's because they don't go outside. It's called Fuda Bat Melech Panima. The girls were generally inside. And maybe, again, it's a question. I said before, what is shimur? What are we protecting from? Are we protecting from bad elements that are around outside, robbers, animals that might attack them? So if the girls are learning inside, right now it seems like the learning environment was different. The boys maybe learned outside and the girls learned inside. That's also hard to imagine. I'm sure the boys also learned in the closed quarters. But I guess the boys, I guess the idea is the boys would have been running around outside, whereas the girls would have been staying in the house, more protected. That's one option. Maybe it's people who say that, girls aren't wild and boys are wild and they'll wreak havoc and girls won't. I'm sure anyone who has daughters knows girls never wreak havoc, never cause any problems in the house. They're always calm. And yeah, as mother of four girls, I can attest it's not true. Even someone here in the Zoom who was in my house once who said, oh, wow, I see girls, people who say that, when my girls were little, you have four girls, they end up being wild together just as well. So anyway, it's a fascinating line about girls needing shimur, that they don't need shimur. It's very interesting, which would then come to, interesting conclusion about teachers of girls maybe shouldn't get paid if you're going to go with that. I mean, again, that's not the reason why teachers get paid. But okay, now what about the girsa problem we talked about before? Wait a minute. It didn't say girls in the Mishnah according to the earlier versions. So the Ran, if you look at the Ran, he actually doesn't have a line that starts off with the words girls mikabai shimur, right? But no mikabai and shimur. His line, if you look in the Ran, says gadol mibai shimur. An older person doesn't need shimur. In other words, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan hold like Rav? Because he said the Mishnah was talking about gedolim, not that it included girls and girls don't need it. It's gedolim don't need shimur. And then basically the Ran says, and the Ran says, and this is why I said already in the time of the Ran, there were people who had this other girsa, because at the end of the Ran, he says, some people say the girsa is banot mi by shimur. So the problem with the girsa in the Mishnah also appears as a problem in the girsa here. Is the text banot, or is the text gedolim? In other words, basically, if you go with the gadol, what he's basically saying is, you had to reread the whole Mishnah and say it was about a katan, and then you had to say it morphed into a gadol, and then the children of the gadol. But that's not what it says in the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is talking about gedolim, and there's no issue of shimur, and therefore it obviously can't be babysitting because the Mishnah was talking about anybody. So that is actually a very good explanation, and it makes a lot more sense. And number one, because the earlier versions didn't even have the girls in the picture. Number two, why would we distinguish between girls not needing protection and the boys need protection? All the more so you would think girls need to be protected more, right? People are more overprotective of their girls than they are of their boys. Again, it leads to the whole question of what exactly is shimur. Like, what are we protecting from? And we don't, as usual, we don't really have an answer. We don't know. And it obviously meant different things to different people and in different times and according to different texts. So it's a whole interesting question. Now we have to do the reverse. Lamanda amar schar shimur, my time alone amar schar pisuk ta'amim. So the one who said you're getting rewarded for, you're getting salary for watching the kids. That's Rav. Why didn't he say Pisuk Ta'amim? So Kasava, Pisuk Ta'amim de'oraitahu. The reason is very simple. He holds, and this is going to lead us to the whole rest of today's daf, which is Pisuk Ta'amim and teaching the Tamei Mikra. Forget what I said about all those teachers who teach for bar bat mitzvahs. Pisuk Ta'amim is Torah law. If it's Torah law, okay, no, it doesn't mean it's Torah law. It doesn't actually say it in the Torah, but we're going to see that they're going to talk about it as Halakha Moshe Sinai. This was passed down to Moshe at Sinai, which is a way of saying, okay, whether it was literally passed down to him or it was a very, very early tradition, which gives it a level of Torah law, which means that it's part of, you can't get paid for this. So basically, Rabbi Yochanan's answer, Pisuk Ta'amim is different than the content. According to Rav, it's no different than the content. You can't get paid for the content. You can't get paid for Pisuk Ta'amim. It's all Torah law. And it's all part of that under the prohibition or the not being allowed to get paid for teaching. How do we know this? Rav and here we're going to see the machloket comes through here. Rav says in the name of Amar Rav Hanan Amar Rav, says in the name of Rav, which is Man Amal. Okay, by the way, I see, Sarah, what you're writing, which is, I'm using the example of bar mitzvah teachers. It is more than that. It's understanding what the ta'amim are. It's like a bar mitzvah teacher who teaches you not just the Tamei HaMikra, but what they mean and what the words mean in their context and why this is this siman and why, how the punctuation works. It is more than that. I should clarify. Thank you. So what they mean here really is teaching what is our tradition of which siman goes where and why that is, okay, and all that. So anyway, Rav Avin says in the name of Rav Hanan, in the name of Rav, my dichtiv, what is the meaning of this pasuk? It's a pasuk in Nehemiah, and it says, "Vayikaru b'sefer Torah Elohim miforash." They read in the book of the Torah from God, miforash, explained, v'som sechel, and they put their minds, v'yavinu b'mikra, and they explained the Torah. So what are all these words and what do they refer to? Vayikaru b'sefer Torah Elohim ze mikra. Okay, that's the Torah itself. Miforash, that's the Targum, right? We have Targum Inkulus, we have some sort of explanation of the Torah. V'som sechel, elu hapsukim. These are the splitting up into verses, right? If you read the Torah in a Sefer Torah, it doesn't have punctuation. That's putting in where to stop. V'yavinu b'mikra ze pisuk ta'amim. That's already, the things that are representative of commas, breaks, all that. But some people say Elu HaMesorot. So we have Rav saying that Yavinu b'mikra is Pisuk Ta'amim. Other people he quotes say they're Mesorot. That must be the Rabbi Yochanans in the world who think that Pisuk Ta'amim is not what's Mesorot. That's if a word is supposed to have a Vav or a Yud. Those are silent letters. Sometimes they have, sometimes they don't. That's the Mesorot. Those are the traditions. Anyway, the point is that Rav holds that these things were all already in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, and the assumption is, what were they teaching them? Things from way back when that were passed down to Moshe at Sinai. So therefore, we see that it's D'oraita. Since we're already on this, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, we're now going to see other things that, by the way, the words Halakha and Moshe Sinai don't appear here. They appear in this coming source, but the commentaries all say that's what this is meant to be understood as. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Mikra sofrim, itur sofrim, karyan v'lo ktivan, ktivan v'lo karyan, Halakha and Moshe Sinai. What are all these things we're going to explain right now? Mikra sofrim, eretz shamayim mitzrayim, or eretz aretz shamayim mitzrayim. These are words that are written. Eretz normally you would say is eretz, but if it appears at the end of a word or by an etnachta, by a big break in the middle of the word, you say it is aretz. You extend it. That's what we call mikra sofrim. It's the way the scribes thought the word should be pronounced. Shamayim mitzrayim, we're so used to this, or Yerushalayim, let's say, if you write those words out in Hebrew without the vowels, you would think it would be Shamim, Mitzrim, because that's normally the way those words appear. Yud Mem at the end of a word, it's usually Im. These have a special Mitzrayim, Shamayim. That's unique, and that is something that was from the Mikra Sofrim. That's something, tradition that was passed down called Mikra Sofrim. Next one, Itur Sofrim. Itur is to decorate. But these are to decorate sentences to make them sound nicer. So what are these? Achar ta'avol, achar telech, achar te'asek, kidmu sharim, achar nognim. Before we get to the last one, I'll stop. These are all sentences where something happened, and then they did this. Now, you don't need to say amen. Say this happened, and this. And it's obvious that in this happened is the next thing after. Okay, so I'll give you the first two examples. I'm not going to read all these psukim inside. You're welcome to look at them on your own, right? These are both from recent Parshiot. So Avram says to the angels, and then you'll go after you eat. And with Rivka, when they go to find a wife for Rivka, the servant of Abraham, so her brother and her mother say, let her sit with us a day or days or 10 days, and after she'll go. Let's say and she will go. The last one is tzikacha kahara re'el, which is this we say in Mincha and Shabbat in the afternoon, right? Your righteousness is like the hills of God. Now, the letter kit is like, it could have just said, there's a pasuk, mishpatecha tehom rabba. Your laws are like gigantic, right? Tehom rabba. It doesn't mean really tehom, it's like tehom. So this is like the mountains, but you could have said it without the kaf. It would have been obvious what you meant. The kaf kind of adds it to make a nicer word out of it. Karyan v'lo ktivan. These are words that are written, but not, recited, but not written. Sometimes there's words missing in the Torah, and the notes on the side say you're supposed to add this. That's called kri v'lo ktiv, prat de bilechto, ish de karsher yishal ish b'dvar Elohim, ba'im de nivneta, la de pleta, etuhu gedu gad, elai de hagorin, elai de asorim, halin karyim v'lo ktivan. Okay, I'll give you one of these examples. The elai of hagorin, very famous from Ruth. There's words missing in the whole encounter with Boaz and Ruth, and there's words about this elai that are missing, right? It's Vatomer Eleha, right? This is it's actually when Ruth is talking to Naomi. Naomi says to her, Kol asher tomri, Ruth says to, I'm confused again. Ruth says to Naomi, Kol asher tomri elai eseh. Instead of Kol asher tomri eseh, whatever you say I will do, just the way you're supposed to read it is whatever you say to me, I will do. But there's a whole bunch of kriyuv there and stuff. Okay, next. Ktivan v'lo karyam, we'll just finish this up, even though it turns into tomorrow's daf. Not divi yislach. This is when Naaman, the Sartzavar of Aram, he's the head of the army of Aram, he gets leprosy, he goes to Elisha heals him, and then he becomes he goes to worship every year. He becomes basically a convert, but it says, but this one thing, please forgive me. Okay, now the word is please forgive me. It says, slach na, but it's written as that, but lo karyan. They don't read the na, the please. Okay, they take that out of the text and just forgive me because once a year I go and I bow down to my idols in Beit Rimon. Okay, so they get rid of the word please there. Zot et ha-mitzvah yidroch dehadorech hamesh tepat hanegev im dechigoel halin tavim v'lo karyan. Okay, these are all cases where there's a word written and it's not read. These are all, again, halakha and Moshe Sinai. By the way, they also have things that are changed, right? Like yishagalna, yishakavna, right? There's different words that are changed from one reading to another. That's also included here, even though it doesn't say it. Okay, so that was a whole bunch of things that we say are traditions, Halakha Moshe Sinai, and that was all because we were talking about the Pisuk Tamim, according to Rav, is passed down to Moshe Sinai, which means you also can't get paid for it, which means that's why he holds it. Babysitting is why you're getting paid and not for what Rabbi Yochanan said. And Rabbi Yochanan didn't want to go with the babysitting because then that would be not inclusive of either girls or not inclusive of Gedolim, of older people, which he viewed the Mishna as including all those. And therefore, again, depending on which version of the text you have, and therefore he didn't hold like Rav. With that, finish today's stuff, and we will continue from here tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.